Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. I have Jennifer Sey back with me today. She is an author, a filmmaker, a business executive, a former national gymnast, and during her career, she went from being a 7-time member of our U.S. women's national gymnastics team to the brand president of Levi Strauss, and now she has forged a new path as the founder of, do we call it XXXY Athletics?
Yeah.
Okay. And I love it. I've not talked to you since I actually received some of the shirts. And I just wanted to say to you, awesome material, but so stylish. And the girls steal them from me. So I have 4 daughters, as you know, they steal them because they were like, they came and they lifted. There's like one of them that's a green shirt that's sleeveless and has like kind of a twist in the front.
Super cute. Yeah.
So cute. So I just want to say, I love your brand. I absolutely
love it.
That's
so nice. That makes me really happy. Look, you alluded to the fact that I was at Levi's. I was there for 23 years. I know a thing or two about making great product. That brand makes great product and they make it ethically. And we do the same. That's very important to me, that it is ethically made. And I just want folks to be able to buy brands that align with their values, that a brand that actually will stand up for female athletes, but people shouldn't have to sacrifice fit, quality, and style to do that, and performance, because that shirt you described is a very high quality performance fabric, meaning it's moisture wicking, it's perfect for working out, but it kind of looks cute for hanging out too. Anyway,
totally.
You shouldn't have to sacrifice quality in any way, or fit or style or any of it, to buy a brand that aligns with your values. So that's my goal.
And I think that when you hear someone started a new brand, honestly, there is this moment of like, are the kinks worked out? Do they know what they're, and no offense to you, but you have that moment where you're like, does this person really know what it means to do this? Yes. I was so impressed. I have to say, I'm so impressed with what you've done. And what a great cause to get behind, especially now. I feel like a few weeks ago, everybody in the country was like, yeah, we're on board. We want to protect women.
They are. I guess I don't mean to be like a Debbie Downer out here. I keep saying this, but like, yes, people are on board. But until every single person that agrees with us with this common sense position that girls deserve safety, privacy, and fairness, we deserve our own sports and spaces, until every person feels they can say that without fear of backlash, repercussion, cancellation, then we aren't done. And look at what is happening out there. I mean, Congressman Seth Moulton, just a few days, he's a Democrat, right? I think from Massachusetts, a couple days after the election. And it's sort of generally accepted at this point that I'm not going to say it was the single issue that won the election, but this issue and the Democrats' obsession with having men in women's sports was a real loser for them. So Congressman Moulton, just a couple days after, stands up and he says, I don't want my girls. I think he has 4 daughters also. Or maybe 2. I don't know. He doesn't want his girls getting run over on the playing field. That's a common sense position. Well, the backlash has been swift. His staff quit, or a good number of people on his staff quit. There are calls for his resignation. The left-wing media has come for him. There were protests outside of his office all last weekend. Like, this is not done.
But he even said, he was like, and this is something that it's not comfortable saying this on my side of the aisle. And that shouldn't be the case. And I think like I just said, I have 4 daughters. And as a mom of girls, I feel like, why aren't there more men? Where are the men who are going to stand up and say, okay, enough is enough? And so before we got on, I was saying, we can bring up and we can talk about what's going on in Congress right now with Nancy Mace. And it seems like it's blown up and gotten out of control. But you make a really great point. You kind of reined me in on this, and I appreciate that, because you're like, look, when do we stop fighting? And if I'm there and I'm in the locker room and I have to get undressed, heck yeah, I want to be with women. I want to know I'm safe.
Well, and the sort of thing that threads through all of this is, ladies, shut up and take it.
Yeah.
You need to be quiet if you want to be a good person. And, you think about Riley Gaines was told by her university and the NCAA, you don't want to do this. If you do this, you'll never get another job. By do this, I mean standing up for women's rights and Title IX. Well, obviously that hasn't been the case for Riley. She's a hugely influential voice, but Paula Scanlon, a member of the UPenn team, swam with Will Thomas on her team, was told by the university when she said she was uncomfortable, do not do this. You will never get a job. I mean, she's a senior. She's a young woman. She doesn't know. It's very scary. And she held her tongue for quite a while until she graduated, until she just couldn't anymore. And so, throughout this is just this like total misogyny, honestly. Like, Why can't Nancy Mace say this makes me uncomfortable? Why does that make her a bigot? Why do women have to sit down and be quiet and take it? And it pertains to the bathrooms at the Capitol. You and I were talking about this briefly before. I'm most certain 10 years ago, there was a very small number of trans-identified individuals presenting as women that were coming into women's bathrooms, and no one noticed and no one cared. But their side has taken it so far. Now they insist that any man with a beard who's obviously creepy and, just creepy and not there to go to the bathroom, if he says he's a woman, he can come in. He can come into the bathroom, the locker room, the prison, and we have to take it or we're bad people. Well, you know what? Now we're going to draw a line. We are.
And there is concern, I think, about when you see that there are some of these folks, historically, I guess it was like the cross-dressing group of men, and they wouldn't have been identified as trans. I think there's a difference between trans and cross-dressing. But the cross-dressing group, it is a sexual fetish. They cross-dress because they get off on cross-dressing. And that is the concern. Is this a trans person? Is this a cross-dressing person? Is this person getting off by going into the women's restroom? Because we've seen that. We've seen those posts, and now we're scared. And you made a great point to me. You were like, look, it's one thing if you are truly saying, I'm now a woman and I'm going in there to use a woman's space, and we may not have known. But because these people have come out so hard that have said they want to endanger women, that have said they get off on this stuff, now we're in a position where we do have to fight back because we don't know who's who.
Well, and you know what? We did give an inch. We used their language. Maybe you didn't. I did for a time. I was willing to use their language. I never really did the pronouns, but, I was willing to sort of be polite. But at the end of the day, Tudor, if we grant them their framing of this issue, if we grant them this idea that trans women are women, that trans women are just as much biological women as actual women, like you and I, then we lose. Because once you say that, if a trans woman is a woman, how do you not let that person into your sports and spaces? And so I think maybe some of us in the beginning screwed up a little, and out of a sense of politeness and kindness, which I think we all have or try to, women especially, we gave a little too much. And then the line kept moving. And now we're holding the line. And
I think you're right. I think
no
women,
more.
by nature, you have that maternal instinct to care for someone. And so there is this opportunity to trample on us from that standpoint. I think that is how this started out, where women are like, these, especially children. And that's the frustrating part about this, is that when you have a child in your child's sport, gosh, you never want to go after another kid, and I wouldn't want a parent to do that to my child. And that's where it's like, okay, that's why there should be rules in place so that it's not that you're going after a child and saying you don't belong in this sport, because there's a reality to it. There is biology there. It is not safe. And that's the frustrating situation that conservatives have been in. And yet I think that after really, gosh, I remember this really becoming a big issue with the track runners out of Connecticut. And I feel like that was in maybe 2019.
It was. And it was 2021 that it might have happened in 19, but the case came forward in 21 and kind of went the wrong direction. But there was just a new decision made. I'm going to get all the legal terminology wrong. But basically, the judge who originally batted it back down has now agreed that it can go forward, because the conversation has changed. The dialogue is changing on it. But again, I would say, let's not get complacent.
No, and I think the dialogue has changed because suddenly we've seen girls losing out
Right.
physically, losing out financially, and losing in their sport. And the devastation of having put your life into something and then getting into high school and having someone rob you of that scholarship, of that place in your sport. I mean, that obviously we've discussed this. We know that is a horrifying situation. But I love having you on because it reminds me you can't stop. You can't stop.
You cannot stop. Look, think of it this way. The left doesn't stop. And, the partnership between nonprofits or advocacy organizations on the left, take HRC, Human Rights Campaign, the partnership between those and corporate America, which allows HRC to kind of further and smuggle their ideas into the culture through advertising of great brands, through product of great brands. I mean, that's how you get things like the Bud Light situation, the Target situation. Clearly, there's been backlash there, but it's not accidental. HRC has been sort of pushing these ideas into corporate America, which allows them to get them out there with huge ad budgets, et cetera. And all of a sudden, it's cool to say biology is bigoted. Well, we have to, and they don't stop. When they get a win, they don't stop. They keep pushing forward. Pride Month
it's
didn't
true.
stop.
And we've seen this so much. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say Pride Month, once gay marriage became the law of the land, Pride Month didn't stop. It got bigger.
Right. And that to me, that's the one thing that I think has been another one where we can't stop on that when it comes to the extreme nudity, the sexual content, the sexual things that are happening publicly. If it breaks the law, it breaks the law. And you can't allow that.
Look, I've been to a million Pride parades. I lived in San Francisco for over 30 years. I've been to probably in the last 20 years more gay weddings than straight ones. Pride took a turn at some point, and it used to be just sort of like floats, with like people dancing. And then it became very much almost like the Folsom Street Fair, which if you don't know what that is, it's a San Francisco leather fair. I mean, it's like a bondage fair, which I stumbled into accidentally once as a young person.
That's a shocker.
It was terrifying. Yeah, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm never coming back here. And I was very open, but I was like, this is too much for me. But the Pride Parade has kind of turned into that. It is overtly sexual, and not just, it's just overtly sexual with tons of nudity. And gosh, I could talk all day about kind of why this is happening. I think it's sort of related to this idea furthered within the psych community that like shame is really bad and we need to kind of do away with all shame. And the only way to do away with shame is to expose everything to the sunlight. I mean, there were billboards during COVID that ran in San Francisco that said, don't be ashamed of your IV drug use used publicly. It's safer and you shouldn't be ashamed.
Wow.
Well, I got news for you. I have friends who suffer from addiction, and what saved them was bottoming out and the shame from that. That is what allowed them to pull themselves up to say, this is not the person I am, and this is not the person I want to be. And there are some activities that maybe you don't need to be ashamed of in the company of your partner or adults, but that doesn't mean children have to see it. It's crazy.
And that's crazy. Not a celebration of love, which when I was growing up and, in my 20s, the Pride parades were a celebration of love. And it's like, hey, be open to love, regardless of, whether it's family or whatever. It was about love, This was not about illicit sex. I guess that's the difference.
Yeah.
And it was about like a kind of a, there was a win with gay marriage and people felt like, okay, now we can have, when I was growing up, I'll just say my grandmother lived next to a gay couple in Arizona. And it was funny because my grandmother had been this like lifelong, super strong Christian conservative. And that wasn't really her jam. Right.
Right.
And then she became really good friends with them. She was also very into performing. So she was a dancer and so they had this like great connection, right? The minute they moved in, she was like, I love these guys. But that was back when you couldn't get married. And so one of them got sick. There was no way for the other one to financially give everything over, like all of the pension and all that wasn't going to go to the partner. And so suddenly he was in this financial catastrophe when he lost his partner. And I remember my grandmother being like, this can't happen. And it was such a shocking difference for her, because that wasn't, of course, her Christian faith, but her love for someone else, her love for her friends was bigger. Understood the importance of making sure that he was financially secure. And I felt like that was kind of what I saw in those Pride parades. It was like, wow, people understanding people and that love. And it's changed.
Yeah. And so I think to come back to the bathroom thing, and I think there are segments of the LGBTQ population that want to divorce themselves from the T and the Q at this point, because all of the people fighting for gay rights, all that they wanted was the opportunity to just live their lives like regular people, but love who they love. They didn't necessarily want to parade that around in front of people, their sex lives. They just wanted to be able to get jobs. You know, if a loved one, their partner was sick in the hospital, be able to visit that partner,
Right.
amend the situation like what you just described. And so I think they're a little bit horrified. Anyway, to come back to the bathrooms, and I know this has been a bit of my kind of evolution, is now I just feel like, okay, if you're going to be so crazy about it, I'm just going to draw a hard line. That's the way it's going to be. Like, I didn't care before, but now I care because you're telling me I have to allow a boy on my daughter's soccer team. You're telling me that, I mean, my daughter's young, but when she gets into high school, she has to be fine with a male being in her locker room. And I'm just not. I'm not. So I'm not going to use the B word, but I'm going to be a bit tougher about it. And I'm going to say no to all of it. Oh, and by the way, at the Capitol, you have a private restroom in your office. There are private restrooms throughout. Like, just stop.
Right.
Just stop.
Right. And so I think that's where we're going to have this battle over the next 4 years. And I'm interested to see where the country goes. But something else you brought up, because you brought up the lack of getting rid of shame and the drug use and all of that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the problems that we're seeing in the country right now are also health related. And a lot of that drug addiction has come from medicalization and them pushing drugs. And I see this so much, even with kids, and the push for immediately, the minute you have an issue, let's get them on Ritalin, let's get them on Adderall, let's get them addicted to something. And they'll say it's not addictive, but it is addictive. And the goal of the pharmaceutical industry is to get everyone on a drug.
Lifelong patient.
Yeah.
It really is. And how this has become something the left is opposed to, it's so crazy to me. I was on the left for a very long time, most of my life, because I thought they cared about kids, the vulnerable. They were kind of skeptical of greedy corporate interests. They were anti-war, like all these things that are the reason I was on the left they're doing the opposite now. They're so deranged by opposing Donald Trump that they will take the side of chemicals in our food to oppose RFK, the new head of HHS. Like, they will literally go against their own beliefs and interests because they are about party, not principle. Who is opposed to getting chemicals out of the food?
I know. And how do you hear it and then not be shocked and not want to change that? Because I think this election cycle has been the most educational for us, because a lot of us have dealt with this, why is my kid medically different than I was? Why are my kids struggling with weight gain? Why are my kids struggling with concentration? And one of the people in my family had a child that had ticks, severe ticks, cut out all the food dyes, no ticks. Like, we are being poisoned.
Yeah. And again, this used to be sort of like the hippie view on the left, right?
That's true.
It was the hippie view, and you had all the natural grocery stores. One of the things that was shocking to me during COVID, which is how some people kind of came to know me, because I was opposed to all the lockdowns and, forced closures and vaccination and stuff. I believe the most vaccinated county in America with children is Marin County, which used to be hippie central. It used to be anti-vax central because it was the hippies that were the anti-vaxxers, but it really has become the right now that is skeptical of big business, big pharma, forced anything. It's crazy. I mean, there has just been this like insane realignment, but I mean, everybody remembers that, right? It was the hippies that were the anti-vaxxers.
Right.
Now,
absolutely.
Now it's a much larger contingent that leans further right out of definitely COVID drove a lot of it, but skepticism of big pharma, big business, et cetera. The raw milk thing that's coming from the right largely. I mean, it's not for me, but
it's kind of interesting when you see how these things impacted this election. The raw milk going after the Amish and taking all of their whole supply and dumping it, and the squirrel that was killed. I mean, all these weird things that added up, and you're like, oh, big government actually sucks. I don't want big government. But I think RFK is one of the most interesting ones, because I do think that partnership changed this election. And I find it fascinating, because that party that you're talking about, the Democrat Party, that was the party of really was the party of hippies, They told RFK, you're too radical. We don't want you because you're concerned about health. And they are still freaking out about him being in charge of HHS.
They are freaking out about him. Most of the hit pieces, despite all the other appointments at this point, or nominations, I should say, they are gunning for RFK. He was a huge part. I mean, there are definitely people in my own family who, lifelong Democrats, just like me, who were very much in favor of RFK for a host of reasons. His work for years to clean up water, protect children from toxins, his skepticism of big business. For me personally, his stance around free speech in the last however many years and during COVID and coming out of COVID has been huge as well. That was a huge one, I think, for independents and kind of independent-minded Democrats. But I would actually put Tulsi Gabbard in the mix as well, former Democrat, kind of the peacenik in the mix, warning everybody about endless wars and how dangerous that is. And this is someone who has real credibility, right? I mean, she's fought wars and she's saying we need to be very careful here. So I think that team has been kind of amazing and definitely was part of helping to win the election. And they're coming for her too, right? They're saying they're back with this whole Russian asset thing. It's like, and people do believe it. There are people in my own family and my circle who will believe every crazy, ridiculous line of lies that the New York Times and CNN spews about these two, and will, despite all evidence, despite all rational, logical thought, it makes perfect sense to get chemicals out of our food to protect our children. It makes perfect sense to demedicalize. I mean, our children are the most medicalized generation ever and the most unhappy. I don't really need any more information than that to know that it's not working. And then from the perspective of Tulsi, we cannot send our children to fight these endless wars. This is not right. We need to be very mindful of that. But yeah, I think the two of them made a huge difference in the election. I mean, I had already made my decision as a former lefty for a host of reasons, COVID being a major one, the insanity around gender ideology. But I know for many, many people in my circle, lefties, the RFK thing was very meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just look at what has happened with big pharma. And like you said, every kid, they're just trying to put every kid on some sort of medication. And I've experienced it in my own life. Had a child that struggled with anxiety. It was immediate. And the medical system.
You mean the recommendation? That was immediate. Yeah.
Yes. And the medical system is so powerful. They call and they're like, no, you have to have this appointment. And I was like, we're not doing it.
What did you do?
We don't even have to. And I finally had to say, I'm blocking the number. Stop calling me. I'm blocking the number, not of my pediatrician, but of the recommended psychiatrist that they had. And because they were calling me every day. You have to come in.
To get your kid on meds.
Yes. And if you think about that, if you aren't knowledgeable about what these medications do, you're looking for an answer for your child. You're very vulnerable. Very vulnerable.
And you trust your pediatrician. You trust I don't trust the medical community.
But you used to. I used to.
Look, I had a similar experience. One of my 4 children had pretty extreme anxiety as a very young person. I'm talking 6, 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty severe anxiety attacks. This was, I was really nervous and worried. And at the time, I was married, to my first husband. And we decided we didn't want him on that pathway and that he would get a label and he would inevitably get, prescribed meds and we would sort of manage it ourselves. And I was very uncertain. I give my ex full credit here. He was very intent on this being what we were to do. And it turned out to be the very best decision. He learned to, manage it himself. He's very happy.
But that's the point. You can. There are other ways. And that's the frustrating situation that we as Americans are in right now, because we are told there are no other ways. Whereas many people use natural ways to get through different medical conditions. I mean, we're not even allowed to talk about it. The fact that in the state of Michigan, doctors lost their licenses for giving people ivermectin during the COVID disaster. I mean, here you are giving a medicine that is approved. It doesn't have these side effects. They all said, oh, this is horse medicine. It was baloney. They lost their license for doing what they knew was medically correct. We have doctors. I know doctors that say, I don't like what the general medicine is trying to push on people. We know there are other ways to solve these medical health issues, but we're not allowed to use them. Crazy.
Yeah. I mean, medicalization is the first path for every problem at this point. Gender dysphoric, you must be a boy. Here's some hormones. You feel a little nervous to go to school. Here's some Xanax. And the problem with this, especially those, sort of psychotropic meds, whether it's for depression or anxiety, is these kids then learn no resilience. They learn no ability to manage hardship. And, the irony is, of course, during COVID, all we heard from the teachers unions and Randy Weingarten and the medical folks who were pushing lockdowns was kids are resilient. Well, you know what? They actually aren't, because we have not allowed them to build resilience. You don't learn to manage anxiety if you don't face anxiety and get through it on your own. You become weaker. And so these children, is it any surprise they are the most depressed? We need a cold turkey generation. We need to get them off the drugs, get them outside, touch grass, as the kids say, off the screens, all of it. Like what we all did as kids. I'm a little older than you, but you probably did this as a kid, rode your bike around the neighborhood. I mean, I had total independence. Did you see the story from 2 days ago about the mom in Georgia whose son took a walk? He was 10. He walked less than a mile to the store and she was arrested for child neglect. No. And now, this happened a while ago, but now law enforcement has said if she's willing to sign this sort of commitment that she will not let her child walk around alone, that he will have a GPS tracker or something, that she can not serve the jail time. And she's refusing to sign. Good for her. I mean, my 7-year-old daughter rides her bike around our neighborhood. I don't know how far she goes. Like, I want these kids, I want her to feel a sense of freedom and independence. And people say to me all the time, what if she falls? She'll have to get herself home.
Just like the rest of us did. And that is actually, if you read the psych journals and all of the research that had been done in years past, it shows that kids who are out playing on their own, that go out and it's like, hey, when it's dark, come home. When we grew up, that was how it was. They learn to be better leaders. They learn to be better team members because they're playing with other kids without a parent involved. But this generation is the generation of play dates where mom sits there with her friend and manages
the whole thing. I mean, the other thing I've really tried to do, and I have kids that are wide range of ages from 24 to 7, is if they have an issue in school, if they have an issue with the teacher, I've had every one of my children come home and complain about a grade, right? I deserved a better grade than that. Okay, go talk to the teacher. Yes. That's not what happens. Mostly the parents will go in and wage that war for the child. I don't care. If you're in 2nd grade and you're unhappy with your grade, you go in and talk to the teacher. Otherwise, how do they learn to do it?
It's so true. So we have this ongoing discussion in our household about band, because all my kids hate band, and they take band and they can quit band in middle school. And they decided to stay with band this year, mostly because I was like, you're in it. You are already signed up. You should do it.
You have to finish. Yeah.
Yes. And then my oldest was like, my oldest in middle school. She's like, I'm in 8th grade. It's really hard. I just want to quit band because then I'd have a study hall. And she's like negotiating all of this. And I said, then quit band. And she goes, what? So then go in and quit. And she was like, what do you mean? And I'm like, you go up to the band teacher and tell him I'm leaving your class. And she was like, no, that's like the parents do that. And I was like, well, your parent doesn't.
Good for you. Yeah.
And I was shocked. She did it though. I was like, okay.
She did.
She called my bluff, but she had to do it. And that she learned.
I agree. They have to do stuff. I mean, I read all these articles about, parents intervening in college classes for college grades.
Right.
And I mean, there's even a percentage of parents that will call a young person's boss to try to negotiate their salary. I feel very grateful. That's never happened to me. Of all the people, thousands of people I've managed over the years, really amazing young people, that has never happened, but it does happen. I know people that's happened to. And these kids are just not learning to be independent grown adults. Is it any wonder they are living in their mother's basement and utterly unresilient?
No, it's funny because before I was in the political world, I worked in manufacturing. So we had our own shop here in Michigan, and it was a steel foundry. So it was like really a rough and tumble job. And that was from almost like 2000 to about 2013 is when we had the foundry. So I think in that generation, it was still like the school of hard knocks. Like you still just, you went to work and you did it. And if you missed, then you got fired, and people just understood that. Then I went from that to selling tool and die steel to the automotive industry. So I went from that to machine shops a few years later. And it was shocking, the difference. They were like, Tudor, you have no idea how bad it's become with kids on the shop floor. I said, what do you mean? He said, the one guy said, let me tell you what happened last week. This kid's machine was down. He's 21 years old. His machine was down. And we had him sweeping the floor because his machine is down. He can't work. His mother calls and says, how dare you treat him like this? You belittled him. He's not coming back for 2 days because you belittled him. His mother.
That's terrible. It's ridiculous. And all of this is not to say that there are not situations. I mean, I grew up, as you mentioned, an elite gymnast. The training environment was brutal and incredibly abusive. And I even get, people saying now, that's not abusive, that's tough coaching. I could describe this environment to you. It was abusive. I was shot up with cortisone every 6 weeks. The doctor came to the gym, no parental consent. I was weighed in 2-3 times a day. It was announced on the loudspeaker. I trained on a broken ankle for 2 years. We were humiliated, fat shamed, bullied. There was sexual abuse that was rampant. We were told, yeah, but he's a respected coach. Just avoid him. Don't say anything. He's respected. So that was a situation that was incredibly abusive. That was normal, standard operating procedure in gymnastics throughout the 80s, I would argue into the 90s and the 2010s. I hope it's changing now. I'm a little skeptical of that. So that isn't to say that adults should not intervene when there is real abuse happening. I'm not out here saying, yeah, it's great that gymnasts train on broken bones and are starved and told to lose 5 pounds by any means necessary by tomorrow. That's not my view, but I don't think it's a fuzzy line. I think there is a really bright line between abuse, tough coaching, and just stuff kids need to learn to deal with.
Yeah, right.
And stand up for themselves and resolve altercations on the playground themselves. Otherwise, we raise young people that are weak, they are not resilient, and they are unable to deal with the everyday ups and downs and challenges of adult life. And that is not good for the country.
You make such a good point because I think we started this conversation by talking about the situation in Congress and how you allow people to push, and we kind of let that happen because of this gentle, we want to be accepting. And I think that's on the big scale, right? But what we see on the smaller scale with parents covering for kids, for adult children at their jobs and that kind of stuff, that has really crept into society in a bad way. And that's why we have to go back to this personal responsibility. Personal responsibility, I believe, is a big part of what won this race, because people are really saying, okay, you have to step up, you have to have a job, you have to contribute. Nothing's free. There's no free lunch. And that's going to be hard for parents today. I appreciate what you're doing. I think your company is amazing. Like I said, I want to just reiterate that the clothes are awesome. Tell people where they can go to get them, because I want them to be able to experience it as well.
Well, you're so sweet. Yeah, they can go to xx-xyathletics.com. You can also just go to thetruthfits.com. That's our fun little vanity URL. We have great sales right now for the holidays. We have amazing gifts for the holidays. I tell people, just don't buy brands that don't know what a woman is. We put our money where our mouth is. We are standing up and platforming athletes that are willing to stand up. We want them to know, not just Riley, but all of these sort of lesser known young women who are bravely standing up and risking their scholarships, risking endorsements, risking friendships and community. They all have very difficult stories. We want them to know that they're not alone when they stand up and stand down or speak out about the need for fairness and equality in women's sports.
So I really think people should think about this because it is Christmas season. We're all looking for gifts for our kids right now. There is nothing better. I'm telling you, these clothes are great quality, but I'm not just trying to sell it. I really think as a mom, I'm always like, okay, my daughter's a golfer. My other one is, my other two are basketball players. We have a volleyball player. And I'm literally right now looking at what kind of clothes do I want to get them for Christmas? And I want to invest someplace where I know they care about my girls. You know, the clothes that they wear are actually going to put back into them.
I so appreciate that. We have such cute golf stuff coming for the spring. Your daughter's going to love it. We have cute little skirts and yeah, she's going to love it. We just were shooting it yesterday. I think, and this may sound self-serving, but brands like mine are relegated. The mainstream uses the term parallel economy, and I refuse to accept that terminology. We are not parallel. We are not secondary. We are mainstream. And I think voting with your dollars for brands like mine or others, Jonathan Isaac's brand, Unite Us, there's tons of them out there, even outside of the athletic space. It proves that we are the mainstream. It proves that there is a viable path for brands that don't forsake women for wokeness in our case.
Yes.
And so I think some people ask me, what can I do? What can I do? I can't really blow up my life. I can't risk losing my job. You can support people and you can support brands that are putting themselves out there. Buy their books, buy their products, use their search engine. Because I think we all collectively need to prove that brands like mine are about common sense and sanity. And we represent the vast majority of Americans. And we're not willing to overlook, the stuff that Nike is pushing on us and the lies that they put out there. They pretend to stand up for women, and they have forsaken women time and time again over the last 10 years. They're sort of famous for it. Don't buy that brand. Buy a brand that actually stands up for women. So I feel like and I'm trying to do it with other brands in other categories. I want to prove that there's a viable path, a financial path, a brand path for these brands that are willing to stand up and represent the views of the majority of Americans.
Well, we appreciate that. And honestly, I know that the listeners of this podcast will support you. So please check out her clothes, check out her website. She's amazing. Jennifer Sey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me again, Tudor.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. For this episode and others, go to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time. Have a blessed day.